I thought that PM 101 is the ability to say no. Just the way that you said no when I invited you to join this podcast.
Yeah, but still, I'm very appreciative of kind of your lowering the bar and also inviting a product manager to your podcast. It's I know it's not easy for you.
I just had a cancellation, so. Hi, everybody. I'm Yuval, and you're listening to YAAP podcast from AI21. Today, we're going to talk with Guy Becker about AI systems and their deep connections to AI agents. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, I'm Guy Becker. I'm a group product manager at AI21 Labs. I've been here for the past 2.5 years. Started as the product manager of our task-specific models product offering. From there, I continued to lead our RAG as a service offering. And currently, I lead our new product that is called AI21 Maestro, which is a multi-agent orchestration and planning platform.
So far, I counted at least 5 buzzwords in your quick intro. Let's see if we can take even more during this episode.
Absolutely.
So on the way to talk about AI agents and AI21 Maestro, I want to actually start at the beginning, or at least in your beginning here. You've mentioned task-specific models, maybe the first AI systems out there, right? So what are they?
Yeah, so I joined AI21 just when ChatGPT started, just as the ChatGPT moment. And we started playing around with different LLMs. We had our own Jurassic 1 LLM. We started experimenting with third-party models as well. And what we saw is that LLMs are really good at many different tasks, but they aren't great at any one particular task. And if we're thinking kind of on the business context, on businesses that want to leverage LLMs for their own use cases, those LLMs aren't necessarily good at solving those particular use cases. We saw really interesting and fascinating demos from some providers. For example, generate a poem where all the words start with the letter Q. And that's an amazing demonstration of capabilities. But for businesses, it really has zero business value.
I think that what businesses really appreciate are chats that speak like a pirate.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely our first...
the first task-specific model is
specific model.
Captain Hook.
Yeah, for speaking like a pirate. So from kind of this notion and working a lot with customers and kind of trying to solve use cases with those LLMs, we realized that perhaps we need to take kind of a different approach. And we want to really focus on those use cases that businesses care about. Such as contextual answering. For example, answering a question based on the corpus of that enterprise, of that business, on their documentation, or summarization of different sources, whether it's documents or transcripts. And as we thought about kind of focusing on those use cases, we started training those smaller language models, SLMs, that are optimized for those specific tasks, so fine-tuned for those specific tasks. And we saw that we can achieve a much higher quality on those use cases that businesses care about. So we really thought, we're on something. And from that notion, we started kind of exploring more task-specific models, and we started to see that while we improve quality, we still see some of the problems that LLMs suffer from.
Such as?
For example, hallucinations. Yeah, everyone are familiar with hallucinations. We also saw that in smaller language models, obviously, that are fine-tuned for specific tasks. So we started taking it to the next level and started treating smaller language models, or there's task-specific models, closer to mini AI systems. And what I mean with that is basically we started incorporating pre- and post-processing operations within those models.
Give me an example for a post-processing operation?
So, for example, we added an hallucination filter for the model. So we would check during kind of the generation part whether the model is hallucinating or whether the output is really grounded in the input context that it was given to. So we actually added those capabilities to the model itself or to the system that we wrapped around the model and marketed with those additional elements. So it wasn't just a model. It wasn't just an LLM. It was what I said, a mini AI system.
Yeah. So, and it kind of differs from the classic LLMs, right? I remember there was a lot of work where all the users, not all of them, but some of them were like, I wrote this instruction and it behaves weird. Like I wrote, answered this, the question based on the following context. But that's not the case here, right?
Exactly. We wanted to simplify a bit the interface with interacting with those systems. So we didn't want to just expose, a prompt and let developers just write down different prompts and also prompts that might not really be adjusted or optimized for those task-specific models. But instead, we just expose them as simpler APIs where the prompt is kind of incorporated into the system. And with those different methods, we were able to both increase the quality of the output in those given tasks. So we reached super high quality with question answering, with summarization, beating kind of the commercial models that were available at the time, and also kind of reduce the footprint of the model. So we were able to create much smaller model with lower latency and lower costs as well.
And also, it was much easier to use.
Absolutely.
Even though it was kind of like the time, I now remember there was a lot of talks with it where users were so used to using ChatGPT and just instruct the model to do things that we actually had to go backwards, right? To tell them, no, this is simple, right? You remember like talking with clients and they were like, why doesn't it do what I asked it to do? Like, because it's much simpler than you think.
Yeah. That was kind of a reverse market education of we're back to simple, but with kind of higher accuracy and more reliability for those models.
So those seem, if I'm thinking about task-specific models, I would describe them as fast, as very contained, very focused, very direct.
Correct.
But we didn't stop there. Right? What was the motivation to go beyond?
Yeah, so one of those models that we released and kind of was the bestseller was contextual answers. Basically, a model that would take an input of a question or a query and context, basically organizational documents or any documents, and would basically ground the response on those input documents.
Yeah, this is where we want to remove hallucinations. Completely. Grounding.
We wanted a very reliable answer that is 100% grounded within those input documents that the users or the organization added to the system. But what we saw is that, while the model performs great and the quality is very high, where businesses actually struggle is to identifying the right context to the model. It's not very trivial. We're testing it in the lab. We have a few documents. We just input it into the prompt and into a large context language model. But in reality, organizations have thousands or even millions of documents in their corpus, and it's very hard to identify the right document to match or to feed for each relevant questions that they get.
Yeah, I think it's also good place to state here what is the timeline that we're in, because currently when we are in 2025 and I'm hearing you describing those problems, it's very clear to me, well, what are you describing, right? You're essentially saying RAG without saying RAG. But we're talking about 2 years ago, something like that.
End of 2022, beginning of 2023, and RAG wasn't that popular at the time. We started seeing some example notebooks or really some just out of the blue examples of how you can implement search with kind of vector search or dense embeddings, but there wasn't really any service that will help you do that. You had to create your own and kind of invent it from scratch. We didn't have kind of the file search from OpenAI or AWS knowledge bases. Those services services weren't there yet, but we were experiencing those real challenges with our customers of how they can identify the right context and input it to the model.
And then you said, well, like contextual answers is not enough. I want to be more complicated.
Exactly.
So introducing...
Let's grab some more land and help our customers to also identify this context and basically create one of the first, I think, RAG as a service offering or products. RAS, yes.
Doesn't have the same...
doesn't
have the same ring to it, I think. Let's just say RAG as a service.
Let's say RAG as a service. And yeah, it was really... We had to create everything kind of from scratch and identifying how we should approach it, what kind of use cases we want to focus on, what kind of files we want to see and import or allow customers to import, what are the restrictions we had to put on such a system. Basically creating an organizational search capability that is also linked or combined with LLMs, and also kind of with all the limitations of LLMs at the time. So you can't just retrieve, full documents or 20 different financial documents. They're too long. You can't feed it to a language model. So we had to also understand kind of what is kind of the minimum that we can actually retrieve and we can feed to a model. What would be kind of the metrics that we need to start to evaluate in order to make sure that the context that we retrieve would be actually sufficient to answer the user query.
And there was literally no handbook at the time.
No handbook.
And now there is I think 1 million handbooks, but then there were 0.
Correct.
So I think we're now in a world where, with vibe coding, with a lot of LLMs, where I think everybody can build something. There's a lot of what they call now AI builders and developers that can just take and build some sort of a product. And the reason that you're here is, as a group product manager, is that the fact that I think that every developer now needs to be a little bit of a PM. So let's walk through it. Let's imagine that we're now in the state where there is no RAG as a service, and you are now trying to build it. How do you approach that? What are the steps that you're making?
So first, I worked with our customers and closely with our design partners to identify kind of what are the use cases that we want to support or to want to tackle first for retrieving documents and answering questions about documents, or even broader kind of what can businesses do once we retrieve relevant information? What do they want to summarize it? Do they want to answer questions about it? So really focus on the use case there, and then see how do we evaluate the performance of our systems and our models on those use cases? What kind of metrics we're looking at and we want to optimize for? What are the data sets that we can actually use in order to make those decisions, or see that we're actually producing something that is useful and we can track them over time and see that we're actually improving the systems and not hurting anything in those models and systems.
So a hunch is not enough.
A hunch is definitely not enough.
By the way, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about a time where LLM as a judge were not a thing, right?
Yeah, we just started kind of experimenting with LLM as a judge as well, and also kind of incorporating into some of the workflows, some of the system, but it definitely wasn't a very well-known thing, and kind of businesses that just starting to implement AI.
So you worked a lot with clients, understood the needs, then you come and define the product, and you have in your head the perfect image of a RAG system that retrieves and generates and everything. But you can't really do that in the beginning. So how did you narrow it down and why?
Yeah, so we started with a narrow MVP. What is kind of the minimal viable product that we can set for RAG that will actually benefit customers? And that will actually help the customers that we're working for, and will also help us kind of establish this notion that what we're doing, that we're in the right direction, and what we're doing is actually useful, and customers would actually use it. This is kind of PM 101, but for AI.
I thought that PM 101 is the ability to say no, just the way that you said no when I invited you to join this podcast.
Yeah, but still, I'm very appreciative of kind of your lowering the bar and also inviting a product manager to your podcast. It's I know it's not easy for you.
I just had a cancellation, so again, like I said, I regardless of the fact that I really appreciate you as a person, I think that every developer now needs to be a little bit PM minded, because it's really easy to just delve into code and do a lot of like vibe coding, a lot of cursor, those kind of things. But you do need a target. You need some sort of focus. And this is something that PMs ideally are good at.
And I think this kind of communication part where the PM defines not just the use case and kind of user stories, but also the benchmarks that they want to focus at. This is kind of setting this new agreement, this new contract, I think, in AI, where we're really focused on what we want to improve and then start to iterate through it. It's not just about features. It's really about quality. How do we approach a task more holistically? So I think this is kind of what we're seeing, in the relationship between product engineering and algo when we're approaching those use cases or those challenges.
So let's go back to starting a RAG system, RAG as a service, and you said that you had to narrow it down. What was the MVP?
So we started just with supporting TXT files. So we started kind of playing around with PDF and docx files and Excel spreadsheets. But there were a lot of challenges of just converting them, just extracting the information from those files. So we wanted to kind of put that aside at the first step and start just with TXT files, with text documents. And we saw that customers are willing to kind of provide us with those text documents. They had PDFs, but they would kind of work on converting it, or they would do some stuff manually, or we had some, solution architects that will help them with the conversion. We didn't want to focus on productizing that just yet.
You can't do anything, right? You have to focus on what you think is your differentiator.
Exactly. So we started with TXT files. We started with quite a large support of documents. So we had like 1 gigabyte of storage per customer.
What is roughly 1 gigabyte?
For TXT files, it's a lot. It's thousands or hundreds of thousands of TXT files. For PDFs, it started to be too limiting. So, and kind of fast forwards a couple of months from there, when we added the support for PDFs, we increased storage capacity significantly for customers. So we started that there with TXT files. We started with contextual answers. So basically the ability to retrieve information for answering questions. So not necessarily summarization or information extraction, but simply for question answering. And also, if you just focus on question answering, there is so many different things you can do, different domains, different type of information. You can answer different levels of complexity, or you have questions in different levels of complexity, whether you ask about something that is very local in the document, or it's actually scattered around in the document, or even in multiple files. And then you need to create this logic of actually retrieving multiple files and kind of mixing them together, or understanding kind of the nuances between those files and the order, and what if there's any contradictions between those files. There's a lot of kind of added logic that you need to add to your system. So also there we started in a very simple kind of terms, just very local questions, and later on kind of where the information is scattered in the document, but in a single document. And later on, we also added the multi-doc support. So everything was very gradual, kind of baked or grounded with a lot of feedback that we got along the way. And this kind of helped us prioritize what should be the next capability.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. You kind of even focused in your answer, because you're not talking about a lot of things that you had to handle with. I will just name drop some of them, right? The chunking, indexing. How do you do retrieval? Do you do a multi-turn? Do you allow chat interface with the RAG? These are all things that you had to deal with. And I'm guessing that some of them, like, maybe walk me through. How did you decide what to do?
Yeah, so early 2023, we weren't really focused on chat models. So everything was a single turn kind of interaction. And that's kind of the model that we started with. Basically a question and an answer, but no follow-ups or not a real conversation that can happen around the scenes. Second, we started working with different embedding models and chunking models or segmentation models. We kind of developed our own or trained our own semantic segmentation model that was also very unique. So not just, splitting chunks by length, but actually understanding kind of the semantic meaning of each chunk or each part within the text. And this really helped with kind of the embedding process and making sure we're able to search and retrieve more relevant parts or more relevant chunks into the user query. And we created this pipeline, which now I think everybody is kind of familiar with, of how a simple RAG chain is created, and started to enhance it with different capabilities.
You mentioned a lot of things that you did, a lot of decisions that you had to make. Maybe let's do some lessons learned from CERT.
Sure. I think the first lesson that we learned is that basically one size doesn't fit all when we're talking about RAG.
And also for SOCs.
Right. So if we're looking at different corpus from kind of different domains and even different use cases for those domains, we couldn't really find one indexing and retrieval method that will work for all of our customers. We had to do a lot of kind of manual adjustments or work with our solution architect team in order to kind of adjust the system to the needs of every different clients. And we really saw that with the evaluations that we run on their behalf. So we saw how kind of different parameters would, increase the quality of one use case, but will hurt the second use case. And we started creating those built-in configurations, so different parameters that solution architects and also later on our customers themselves would be able to control. And that would actually enhance the quality of retrieval and also the augmented generation part. And we're talking about parameters such as, for indexing, controlling how do we chunk the documents, what kind of PDF parser we're using, how much overlap we see between different chunks, how much context to retrieve during inference. Is it just the chunk themselves or neighbors or maybe full docs in certain use cases? So we made those parameters available, and we would help kind of customers utilize them best to fulfill their use case. So this is kind of one thing that we learned. We tried a different approach of kind of trying to automatically optimize those parameters based on kind of a data set that a customer would provide us. And that kind of led us to the next kind of generation or the evolvement of this RAG system of what we call Maestro today. And perhaps we'll talk about it a bit.
Yeah, let's just make sure that we're covering all the lessons learned, because I know there is more than one lesson. And I've spoken with you about that a lot. For instance, the serving part, what did we do with the RAG and how did the clients get it?
Yeah, so I think we worked with a lot of customers that were willing to kind of index their documents into our SaaS environment, but we saw many others that had more sensitive documents that didn't want to just send it over the internet and have us kind of store their corpus of documents. And like we started with SaaS, but quickly we realized that if we want to reach kind of a larger audience of customers and really help solving those more interesting and sensitive use cases, we really want to add kind of support for VPC deployment and even for on-prem that we now support.
And maybe just about the decision of doing RAG It's not actual RAG, right? It's not just generation. We only did it with contextual answers.
Yeah, so we started by combining the retrieval part with the generation piece of contextual answers, but we saw that customers want, other use cases as well. They don't just want to answer questions; they want summarization, as we mentioned before. They want to generate, documents or emails based on the context that they provide to the model. And for that, we kind of opened the retrieval part as, a separate endpoint, just a semantic search endpoint or a hybrid search endpoint, basically, that would help kind of power those use cases as well. So customer would be able to treat this as a kind of a building block and combine it, with other models or other use cases.
So from task-specific model, we went to RAG as a service. And then we decided to kind of break down the RAG as a service and offer each part as a task-specific model as well. Right? That was
correct,
like the
correct.
synergy, but you can just use anything, whatever you want. We even had a segmentation, right? An endpoint.
Yeah.
Semantic segmentation.
Correct. The
really
segmentation for embeddings, for users that did want to kind of build their own RAG chain. And we had very high quality components. So we said, why not just giving them?
And also one thing before we're moving to the next system, I do remember there was a part in the retrieval system that we talked about some sort of extra metadata or something like that. Can you share maybe a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So we've seen kind of working with few customers that certain corpuses have very similar documents to one another. And really the method of semantic retrieval isn't really useful when you're trying to query those documents. For example, I think the most familiar example right now is with SEC documents, so financial documents.
Yes, every financial demo right now is SEC filings.
Exactly. But we just started in realizing those issues back in 2023. So semantic retrieval wasn't really helpful, and we started using kind of metadata indexing, or we would extract or automatically extract metadata from those documents and then index them with those metadata. And metadata could be, the company name and the period that the report is referring to. And this would really help us in kind of the inference time to identify the right documents to start with from this holistic or this full corpus of documents. So we would extract this information from the user query and would do some sort of filtering before we actually apply the semantic search. And that really kind of boosted performance really significantly.
Both quality and latency.
Right? Correct. So we can start with lower context or smaller context and then feed smaller context into the language model, and we saw better performance there.
This sounds like a very specific solution for this problem. Right? Like ideally, I wouldn't want to go and solve specifically every problem in the RAG flow or something like that. Right? Which leads us to
Maestro, to AI-21 Maestro. And this is kind of our current project or current product that the team develops here in AI-21, and it really came to solve those issues. We saw how RAG worked great with kind of more simple questions, but when we're starting to feed it with more complex questions, for example, a multi-hop question that we need to gather more information and use some of the information that we retrieved and answered part of the question, and then use that information to retrieve the next part to answer the full question. So our RAG system wasn't really great at answering these kind of questions, but we saw that other RAG systems and other LLMs aren't great at that either.
So it's not just us.
So it's not just
the
us.
Floor
it's a real
problem
and a real challenge in the market. And we also saw that kind of users or customers that leverage task-specific models typically need more than just one task-specific model for kind of solving a full use case. They were quite fragmented in that sense, and it was really hard to kind of combine or to route to the relevant task-specific model in order to kind of solve a real use case. So kind of from that notion, we decided to mature task-specific models and kind of the mini AI systems that they were into creating a more holistic AI system that we recently announced as AI21 Maestro. So if we're kind of thinking of AI21 Maestro as like a multi-agent collaboration platform, but really the focus is on planning and orchestration. And we're leveraging kind of different first-party agents that we've built, for example, for instruction following or for RAG, and they're really great at performing those those tasks, RAG tasks or instruction following tasks. But the heart of the system is really the planning and orchestration. So we would take, for example, a very complex query or a very complex task and start to break it down into multiple subtasks. So we understand kind of what should be executed in order to fulfill the full use case. And we would break it down, and then we would also orchestrate the relevant agents and tools that are available for the user in order to fulfill each of those subtasks. And kind of the system would automatically understand what could be parallelized, what should be in a chain. So the orchestration or the execution itself is very efficient. And we kind of leverage relevant tools, relevant agents, relevant LLMs even that the customer want to use in order to reach kind of the best possible result and achieve very high quality with kind of output guarantees as well in those tasks.
Okay, Guy, that was a really good explanation. But let's try to find a concrete example. Let's maybe stick with RAG, because that's the underline of all the things that we talked about so far.
Okay. So if we think of a question such as what has been the trend in hardware revenue between fiscal years 2022 and 2024, and the reasons for this trend. If we're taking this question, just send it to an LLM, we'll get an okayish answer probably. And if we'll combine kind of RAG and our document corpus to answer it, it will be perhaps a little bit better if we have very well-written reports to support this answer. But what we saw best is that we'll start to break down this question into kind of multiple steps and multiple subtasks. So try to answer that question for every fiscal year separately. And we would take, for example, 2022, ask what has been the hardware revenue in that year, retrieve just the parts that are relevant for that year, and then, have an interim step and answer that question there and continue for each year. And then take the reasons, for example, separately and identifying what has been the reasons for this trend, and overall, or only at the end, just combine all the information that we found into kind of the final result that we give to the user. And when we took that approach, we saw that quality just improves dramatically.
You had a lot of steps.
Right.
I somehow found myself like kind of losing the plan on the way.
So the plan itself is automatically generated, and it's generated in code, so it's also executable. And the system also understands automatically what can be parallelized in this question. So all the steps for each year, for example, are just parallelized automatically. So the latency is much lower than what would happen if you would just chain all these steps together.
Sounds long, but actually fast.
Exactly.
Maybe another example showing something else?
Yeah, sure. So let's take a very different question also about finance. But if we ask, for example, what has been kind of the average revenue for NASDAQ biotech companies in 2024, that's kind of a very different question. And you would think that you would answer it from kind of perhaps a structured database, a relational database. But what if you don't have that database available? You have really documents about those companies. And that kind of brings us to the approach that we talked about earlier, where we, in the indexing process, or kind of when we index documents, we also identify or retrieve some of the metadata or some of the information within those documents and structure them in a relational database. And when we do that, we can actually query those documents in a SQL form. So we can actually generate a SQL query and use that query in order to retrieve the relevant information, answer this question as if it was, already there in a structured database. But we started with kind of unstructured documents and kind of transformed it into a more of a structure.
Yeah, so really evolving the concept of the metadata and how it helps RAG, especially in these type of questions.
Exactly,
I would say.
exactly. And there, the AI systems that we see in the market are just incapable of answering those kind of questions just from the documents alone.
I think it's an interesting point now because before we talked about how was it to do a RAG as a service in 2023 when there were no handbook. And now it seems that we're trying to do here an AI planning and orchestration system. There's a lot of handbooks, but not quite the one that matches here. So what is the strategy as a PM here? Wow, what do you do?
So I think that the first priority is really defining kind of the vision, the long-term vision of how we see this new product, AI-21 Maestro. What do we want it to do? What kind of business problems we want to tackle, and start to break it down into kind of pieces that we can actually ship faster and give to customers' hands and start experimenting and see what actually works and what doesn't, and whether we're at the right direction. Kind of similar to what we did with RAG. So we're starting kind of with those components that we have kind of better understanding of how users would use, that they solve an actual challenge that they have today and not for tomorrow. And they would kind of help us in this direction of like where we want to go and take this product. So we started kind of with the RAG agent and the instruction following agent that solve actual problems that we already seen with customers that we interact with. And we added that component of planning and orchestration to really take it to the next level of solving complex tasks.
With quality guarantees.
With quality guarantees, exactly. What we've also added here is kind of the ability to actually see or visualize what's happening inside Maestro. So it's not just a black box, it's a clear box. And we have kind of the full traces of every decision that the system took. So this is really helpful for enterprises that want this visibility, that want this explainability into their AI system.
So better quality, better explainability, like the future of agents, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, Guy, let's wrap this episode up. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Just answer, don't overthink it.
Okay.
What's the most important thing for an AI product?
Evaluations. So benchmarks, metrics, and goals.
Real-world data and academic benchmarks. How do they correlate?
Not really.
Okay, and how do you bridge this gap?
Basically incorporating real-world data into your evaluations.
Anything else about benchmarks or data?
We need to remember that benchmarks and datasets are curated by humans, and humans make mistakes.
Definitely. A lot of mistakes. Well, thank you very much, Guy. It's been a pleasure having you here. It was not a mistake inviting you after all. And everybody, stay tuned for other episodes.